Maskagero. Welcome, welcome. Hello.
So, greetings to everyone.
Greetings, peace, and blessings. Assalamu alaikum. Let's go to everyone.
Assalamu alaikum. Masai al-khair. Sabah al-nur. I'm hearing the echo, so if we can all mute ourselves if we're not speaking. Family, wherever you're tuning in from the world, let us know. Say hello, say peace in your language or in the language of the country you're tuning in from. We are here very excited to have Sister Tamara chair and host this panel about our memories and journeys along the Nile. My name is Dima Mahmoud, and I will be introducing myself as Tamara directs. But for now, please take a moment to share this video with your friends and families, share them on your pages. And though the conversation will be in English, we welcome the questions in any language, well, not in any language, in Arabic, because that's the language we can translate here. I'm just going to say this in Arabic as well. مساء الخير السلام عليكم أنا ديما محمود النقاش ده حيكون على ذكريات ورحلاتنا على ضفاف نهر النيل ورحلاتنا للنوبة. النقاش حيكون باللغة الإنجليزية، لكن الأسئلة ممكن تكون باللغة العربية، وإن شاء الله بترجمها ونقدر ناخذ الجواب. شكرا لكم. And Tamara, over to you.
All right, thank you for that introduction, everyone. And thank you for tuning in tonight to Nubia Fest 2020. And our panel discussion tonight is Journeys Along the Nile, which is on travel to Nubia, its culture, its people, and its impact. And each of us on the panel tonight have traveled in Nubia, whether it was to visit or to study or to work. And regardless of the reason, it made a powerful and lasting impact on us and forever changed us. And our perception of our history has also changed. So that's what we're going to be discussing some tonight, and just the wonderful land of Nubia. I was so excited when I went in 2006. I went as part of a study tour, and it was a lifelong fulfillment for me because I always wanted to go to Kemet and Nubia, and I finally got that opportunity. And we're going to start with just a brief introduction. If each person can introduce themselves for a minimum of 3 minutes, you have just 3 minutes to talk and share something about yourself. And let's start with Dima. Would you like to start?
Sure, yes, thank you, Tamara. My name is Dima Mahmoud. I am Nubian from Sudan, though I grew up in Egypt. My connection to Nubia is obviously my ancestry, and though I got introduced to it or acquainted with it much later in my life, it wasn't until I was studying my master's degree in Exeter, at the University of Exeter in England, that I first started exploring what is Nubia, what is the Nubian language, and why it's so important to learn it. And it's all thanks to Professor Herman Bell, who I have to give credit to because he was holding an exhibition and a talk at the University of Exeter that was called Paradise Lost. And it was about Nubia. And I'm seeing all these photos, and he's coming and he's speaking to me in my language, and I had no idea what he was saying, and I couldn't respond to him. And he was extremely heartbroken. He was enraged, but he was also very, very heartbroken. And to see this man from Virginia, who was based in Oxford, get so worked up because I don't know my language and he does. To me, it didn't sit right. So I went back to my dorms, and I have to understand why. What was why? And I started seeing it, and I think that was the first serious argument I had with my father. Like, how dare you not teach us this language? And my first journey to Nubia was, though I went to Luxor, So some will tell you that's not really Nubia. I'm not going to get into that. Um, but my first deliberate journey to Nubia was 2018. It was August 2018, and that's where I met Kamau actually. And in meeting Kamau, I heard and learned about Salim and met him later that year, but we'll get into that later. And yes, absolutely, that encounter with Herman Bell, 1000% changed the trajectory of my life. And meeting Nubians on Nubian soil absolutely did the same.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for sharing that with us. And let's hear from Dr. G. Would you like to speak next?
Thank you again. I'm pleased to be here. I was on a panel actually on Monday with my colleagues in Nubian Studies. I'm Dr. Salim Faraji. I'm a professor of Africana Studies at California State University, Dominguez Hills. I'm also a Nubian Studies scholar, Nubian Studies specialist, also referred to as Nubiologist. And by my colleague, Manu Pim, a Kushologist, right? We have a number of titles we can go by. You know, Dima, I met Herman Bell 10 years ago at the British Museum at the Nubian Studies Conference there in London. And, you know, I had never met him before. We were just chatting and talking at a reception at the conference. And we ended up talking. I'm not exaggerating. We probably talked for 3 or 4 hours. And I did not know Dr. Bell before that time. But it was just an amazing conversation and discussion. And what I learned just from talking to him was just profound. And mind you, that was also my first Nubian Studies Conference, the one at the British Museum in 2010. And so, yeah, I was just impressed by him. I mean, he was telling me the correct pronunciation of Balanya, right? The Nubadian kingdom of a late antique Nubia. It was just, you know, it was just incredible. And I also discovered that he had ties to Northwestern, and he knew one of the architects of Africana studies, Dr. James Turner, right, when he was a younger man. So it, you know, and so you and I talked about that as well. When we met in Paris, we discovered that we had both met Dr. Herman Bell. So my introduction to Nubia and Nubian, and I'll talk more about it in detail beyond introductions, actually occurred in the 1970s. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I grew up in a neighborhood in Philadelphia, and in their neighborhood there was a religious sect, a religious community that claimed to be tied to Nubian legacy and Nubian heritage. And so it was as a small boy that I first heard the term Nubian in my West Philadelphia neighborhood in the early to mid 70s. But as a Nubian studies scholar, in terms of Nubian antiquities and scholarship, I was introduced to to the discipline. It's been about 24 years now. 95, 96 is when I used to the study of ancient Nubia. And I'll talk more about that journey. And then I took a trip to Egyptian Nubia. It's been a while now. This was in 99, 98, 99. And I never forget, it was an awesome time because the Nubia Museum in Aswan, just, it had only been open like 2 years or maybe a year at most, right? So it was still fresh and exciting. And so I met Osama Magweed at that time, all those years ago. And so I'll talk more about that. And you know, ever since then, I've just been engrossed and enmeshed in Nubian study history. And for me, it's not only part of what I do as a scholar. It's an ancestral call. It's a sacred summons that has called me to Nubia. So I'll just stop there for now.
All right, thank you. That was wonderful, wonderful. I like Pushologist. I like that. So let's hear from Brother Kamal. Would you like to share your introduction?
Yes, peace and blessings, everyone. My name is Kamal Malik Grimes. I am uh, uh, many things, but I like to say I'm a native of Washington D.C. Um, of course, the roots are in Africa. Because of the Ma'afa, I don't know exactly where in Africa. I was able to find some of my ancestry utilizing AfricanAncestry.com. So I found out that my maternal lineage it comes from the Hausa and the Fulani people in Cameroon, and also the Tikar people of Cameroon, as well as the Bubi people of Equatorial Guinea. So that's only one branch of the tree, if you will. So there's much more to me than just that, but I found that out last year. In terms of Nubia, you know, um, like I said, my name is Kamal. That's a Kenyan name, although I'm from here. My parents, they were pretty Afrocentric, so they named all of their children, African names. And in terms of the journeys along the Nile, my older sister, her name is Nile, and that my parents chose to spell it with a Y. So I've been around the Nile my whole life, and so Kamal means silent warrior in Kikuyu slash Kiswahili. So it's kind of a popular name in Kenya. Um, but so that I knew about Nubia as a child, essentially. Not much detail, but we just we had a very positive. And when I think of Nubia, I think of like the most ancient, idyllic, just so much romanticization, because uh, one of the things my parents tried to do, even though they didn't know a lot of the specific information that some scholars like yourself, Dr. Faraji, and others, they didn't know a lot of specifics, but they knew that it was great and they knew that it was the source of civilization. So those are the things that they would tell us. In terms of traveling to Nubia, I was able to participate with the archaeological excavation taking place in Luxor with the brother Anthony Browder, and the organization is called the ASA Restoration Project. And so
Yeah.
this is the only African American or funded excavation in all of Egypt and all of history. So it's pretty monumental. We're able to, navigate and work with British archaeologists and Egyptologists and people from Ireland and Germany and um, what was the guy from? I don't want to say somewhere in East Asia. I don't want to say the wrong country. But people from all over, and we represent it very well because we were the funding of this project and the managing of this project is coming from African American dollars in our mind. So
Right.
I met Dima on that trip, and we traveled to Aswan together. Well, I met her in Aswan, met her in Luxor, then traveled to Aswan and met her again in Aswan, and then went with a trip. We drove about 2 or 3 hours to Abu Simbel, right along the border of Sudan. So got a chance to navigate the real Nubia. Um, and I'm gonna end it there, but I want to say my background is I went to Howard University and got my master's degree in African Studies. Just graduated last year, and I focused on Ethiopian and African American relations and the concept of Ethiopianism within the Pan African movement. And for those who study ancient Nubia, will know that that's a part of ancient Ethiopia, not necessarily the modern Ethiopia. So Nubia, it's like a continuation of my study. And when I went to Nubia, I felt like I was in another part of Ethiopia, to be honest with you. That's really how I felt, as opposed to being in Cairo. It had a totally different feel.
Indeed. Yes. Well, thank you for sharing with us. And I am Tamara Dickerson, founder of Astral Healing Arts Wellness Center. And I went to Egypt and the Egyptian side of Nubia in 2006 as part of a study tour with Dr. Clinton Crawford and a large group of people from all over. Some people from New York, some from um, California and some from Virginia and of course the Washington DC area. And it was truly a life-changing experience. I had such a wonderful time. I vowed to come back and I haven't been back yet, but I'm planning on it, inshallah. And it was just out of all the cities we visited, Aswan was my favorite. I liked the energy there. The people were very warm and friendly. And then another wonderful thing about traveling in Nubia is the warmth, the friendliness, the kindness of the Nubian people. They're some of the warmest people you ever meet. They treat you like you're a long lost, family member that has come home, and everywhere we went, we were greeted warmly, and that just really, left just touched a part of my soul. One of the first people I met at the hotel I stayed in was a Nubian brother named Saleh. I never forgot him, and his smile, his energy, his kindness to me, and how accommodating he was when he talked to me and other people in our groups. And everywhere we went, we would just greeted as family members and called, Nubian brother, Nubian sister. And growing up, listening to hip hop music, we had a group called Brand Nubian, and the sisters from Africa that sang Les Nubian. So I heard the word Nubian thrown around a lot growing up. And so to me, it was synonymous with who we are as African people throughout the diaspora. And so without further ado, we're going to start with the questions. And what was the purpose of your first trip to Nubia? What was the first purpose of your first trip? So let's hear from, who would like to go first? We're all family, so you can volunteer. Yes.
I'll go. As I said, my deliberate trip to Nubia was in 2018, and it was to connect. And it just so happened that because I was raised in Egypt, I grew up in Egypt, it was easier to go to the Egyptian side. And it just so happened that prior to traveling to Egypt, I was here, and I in one of the meetings met with someone who connected me with Tony Browder. And he told me about the excavation, and that, as Kamal said, it was the first and only African American funded excavation project on anything Nubian, and it was fascinating. It was fantastic. I was like, right, well, first of all, I want in. Second, how can we get more of this? And so he very kindly and generously invited me to visit, because I told him I was going for my cousin's wedding. I was like, well, I'll be in Egypt anyway. He's like, well, come through. And that was my first, there was too many firsts in that trip. It was my first trip to proper Nubia. It was my first time being in an active excavation site. It was also my first libation ceremony. I was like, to attend a libation ceremony. I was like, oh, okay. But it was such an energy, seeing people who are just taking time out of their schedules, taking time out of their lives to connect with what the ancestors left behind, and to do it so carefully so that they're protecting that legacy and sharing it as is, away from the defacing, away from any attempts of erasure, away from anything we are still experiencing now. As Salim was saying, if you've missed the panel that he was on, please, please, please make time and go back to watch that panel. The title is The Nubian Past, Scholars Building Community. And it goes to the heart of why we need more people of African ancestry doing the digging, people of African ancestry connecting the dots. And I think that was unknowingly, I did not know that connection was going to happen that way, but it just made so much sense once I got there, once I got to the excavation site, and it's just continued to build. That was in 2018, and we're 2020 now, and there's not a single time, and Kamal will confirm this, there's not a single time that I look back at that trip and look back at that particular visit that I don't say, wow, how everything is aligned. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. But yes, my purpose was to connect.
I can go next since
Thank
since
you.
um, since my trip is kind of connected to Dima's trip because it's the same trip. Although I didn't know her going there, but we met there, and definitely I'm happy that we were able to make that connection, and definitely a spirit connection, definitely an ancestral connection, and it doesn't matter if you're have direct ancestry to that land or indirect ancestry, we're still called all the same. So a little bit about the excavation. We were excavating. It's a project, the Acer Restoration Project. It's been going on since 2008, and we are excavating, and now we're in the restoration phase and getting ready to open it up for the public. But they've been doing it, like I said, since 2008, and what we have there is two tombs. Actually, there's three tombs, but tombs. The two main large tombs are of two 25th dynasty noblemen. And so, if you know anything about the history of Egypt, you'll know typically people say there's around 30 or 31 indigenous dynasties, if you will, ruling families, since around the time of 3200 BC up until the time around 332 when the Greeks came in. So, the 25th dynasty is known as the Kushite dynasty, or some could even say the Nubian dynasty, because it's one where kings from Kush, which is they were rivals of Egypt, um, and Kush, they ended up ruling over Kush and Egypt, and they had epic battles against the Assyrians, and many people may recall that some may not know, but I believe it's the only pharaoh that's mentioned by name in the Bible. Taharka, he's one of the kings of that 25th dynasty, and so this is the one dynasty where traditional Egyptologists and the like admit and that it's a black dynasty. Now we know all of the dynasties were black, and we can argue over what it means to be black and what it's not, but I always look at it as if they said, if they use the opposite, sometimes it seems like Egyptologists and scholars try to use the opposite definition of black when it comes to finding, when they look at Egypt, as they do when they're defining African Americans and us in the diaspora, because we had the one drop rule, or at least if you were discernibly black or had any discernible black influence, then they put you in the black category. Versus in Egypt, if you have any discernible possible non-black influence, then they automatically just say you're just Caucasian white, pretty much. So that's really annoying that they do that. But it's once you go to Egypt and you go to Nubia, and Edema can attest to this. I mean, some of the people, they see you and they identify with you. It's kind of automatic when they see you. It's like, oh, you look like my brother, you look like my sister, so you are my brother and my sister.
Now 1000% passed as a Sudanese. Regress of just like, just don't get away, just keep going.
Yeah, so that was very nice confirmation. I love that. That's one of my favorite things about traveling to Africa. But yeah, like others said, it was a search. I'm interested in African studies, African history, reconstructing our history. I'm an educator. You know, I'm a teacher, a scholar, and so I was there going to Luxor and going to Egypt to discover our history, and I always wanted to go to Nubia. So I didn't get a chance to go to Sudan, but we did get to see Abu Simbel and Aswan. So It was a wonderful experience. I look forward to the rest of our conversation.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Faraji?
Yes. My first and actually only trip to Egypt and Egyptian Nubia was in 98, 99. I was in graduate school. In fact, I was a first year PhD student, first year doctoral student at Claremont Graduate University in Southern California, LA metro area. And one of the institutes at Claremont was called the Institute for Antiquity and Christianity, and they specialized in ancient Egyptian history in general, modest, but more specifically, ancient Egyptian Christianity. I don't know if people have heard of the Nag Hammadi codices. The Nag Hammadi codices were these Egyptian Gnostic texts that were discovered in Egypt, I believe, in 1945, thereabout. I may be off by 2 or 3 years, either way. And so Claremont had connected with the Coptic Museum in Cairo and was able to translate these texts, right? It became a major center for Nag Hammadi studies, the Nag Hammadi codices, as well as ancient Egyptian Christian studies in general, right? And so one of the leading scholars in that enterprise, his name was Dr. James Robinson. He was at Claremont and one of the founders of this Institute for Antiquity and Christianity. So I come during this time. And so I had already had a profound and deep interest in traveling to the Nile Valley, Egypt, and Sudan, even before I entered Claremont. I mean, if I go, like I said, I was exposed to the word Nubian in the 1970s. Like Tamara, I remember in the 80s rocking Nubian t-shirts, right? In the height of the Afrocentric movement of the 80s and 90s and so forth, right? And like you mentioned, the hip hop group Grand Nubians was banging, right, on the radio and so forth. And then the neo soul group Les Nubians, right? And so we were wearing all type of political and culturally conscious t-shirts and so forth. And so some of those t-shirts, they had the Nubian brand, right? And so, right, you couldn't tell me in my late teens, early 20s, that I hadn't connected with Nubia and ancient Nubia just from rocking a Nubian t-shirt, right? And then this group in my neighborhood in the 70s, they called themselves the Ansar Allah, right? And some people have heard about them, right? And they used the word Nubian in their designation, right? They called themselves the Nubian Islamic Hebrew. So this is the first time that I had heard the word Nubian. And then by the 80s and 90s, with the height of the Afrocentric movement, it takes off into a life of its own. I think in the early 90s, there's a major Nubian exhibit at the University of Pennsylvania, right? Ancient Nubia, Egypt's rival in Africa, right? This was a well-known exhibit at the University of Pennsylvania. At the time, I had just graduated from college. I was a social worker, foster care social worker, so I was taking youth to see this exhibit, right? And so I was already moving and driving in that direction. By the time I got into my doctoral program in the late 90s, I went to Egyptian Nubia for scholarship and research, and I went with one of my colleagues named Dr. Jahi Issa, who was at the time a PhD student at Howard University in the history department, focusing on African diaspora studies. And he had actually spent some time in Egypt, study abroad as a student. And so he was like, Salim, let's go, right? It'll help your research, scholarship. And not only that, this is a journey that we always wanted to make. So I believe it was maybe the winter of 98, 99. So like maybe November, December into January is when we made our journey. Of course, it was unbelievable. Just like Tamara and Dima and Kamal have said. I remember The first, this is what we did. The first thing we did the minute we got out of the airport and we went to get on a train, we said we're going to do our tour moving south to north. So that's what we did. So the first thing we did when we get out of the Cairo airport is hop on a train. We took a 14-hour train ride to Aswan. Just to see, and it's been over 20 years now, but I remember it like it was yesterday, right? And so just the people that we met, I remember meeting Nubian students from Asut University, right? Asut University, kind of in the middle, kind of the midway point in Egypt between Aswan and Cairo and so forth. And so we had, you can imagine 14 hours, we had a long conversation with these students, and they were just telling us about the history, the language, traditions, and customs. And also when we was there, it was also Ramadan as well, now that I recall. So Ramadan was also happening while we were there. Even they had plainclothes security guards on the trains, right? Plainclothes security guards on the trains, right? Kind of undercover, right? Just to make sure the security, right? And the two that we happened to meet were also Nubian, right? And so we were like, wow, we're running into Nubians and so forth, and we're on our way to Aswan, right? And so they're telling us you're going to enjoy it once you get down there, right? And so we finally arrived in Aswan. I wish I could remember his name, but there's a young man who was about our age, right? And so in the late 90s, we were like late 20s, early 30s then, and he befriended us and took us around, and we broke the fast of Ramadan every evening with him. I remember walking the streets of Aswan, and the men would be sitting on the side, maybe sometime in front of their shops, sometime in front of their cafe, breaking fast and having dinner. Every cafe, every shop, every store, every home we walked by, the people invited us to eat and break fast. They didn't know us. They had never seen us before, and that didn't matter. That was unimportant and irrelevant, right? You, our visitors, your guests, come and break fast. And so the time that I spent in Egypt, I echo what you all have said, right? The most enjoyable time for us was in Aswan, and several instances where I forget the name of the local transportation, like the buses, the little mini buses that were used. In Ghana, they're called trotros. I can't remember what they're called in Aswan, right? It's local form of transportation. Yeah. If I did not open my mouth and reveal my Anglicanized accent, right? I kept my mouth shut because I was also dressing traditionally, right? I wasn't, trying to look like jeans and a t-shirt. I was trying to dress as traditionally as possible in Aswan. So if I kept my mouth shut, people would start speaking Arabic to me, right? They thought I was Nubian as well, right? And of course, like Kamal said, that was just positive affirmation to experience that. And so, this is over 20 years ago. So I still have those photos, images that I took with shop owners, store owners. We visited Nubian villages. We went into their shops. We had conversations with men, women, as well as children. Right? I have some classic photos. Dima, I think you may have seen them because I posted one or two on Facebook. I have some classic photos of myself with Nubian children, right, in a Nubian village that we took. It was just an amazing time. And again, I went for research and scholarship. So I went to the Temple of Philae, and I went to the Nubian Museum in Aswan. I met the director, like I said earlier, Osama Magid, and so forth. And all of that was amazing. Visiting the temple sites, the tombs, the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens. We did Edfu as well, the Temple of Horus, the Haru there. Everything that someone would do when they were on a tour to Egypt, right? We did all of that, right? From Cairo to Aswan. but for some reason, I remember the people. It's the interactions I had with the people, their hospitality, their warmth, which left an indelible mark on me some 24 years, 23 years later since I made that journey. And again, the Nubian Museum, because it was brand new, was only a year or 2 years old then. So we got to travel through that museum. And that was historic, right? And it still is historic, don't get me wrong, but it's just been around now for a while. But in the late 90s, the Nubian Museum in Aswan was historic because up until that time, there was no museum. All the museums in Egypt and all the antiquities in Egypt, there was no museum specifically devoted to Nubian history and Nubian culture, right? And so that was a very big deal. And I just considered myself and the brother I went with, Dr. Issa, to be fortunate to have had that experience and so forth. So again, my memories of my journey were very positive and have lasted with me over the last 24 years or so.
Wonderful. Yes, yes. I can definitely bear witness to the friendliness and the kindness of the people. Why do you think so much emphasis is put on ancient Egypt and other ancient civilizations, but not so much on ancient Nubia? Dima, would you like to answer that?
No, Tamara, I would like to direct the question at you. Why was your first trip to Nubia?
Say that again. My purpose of my first trip?
Yeah, aren't you going to be answering the same question?
Yeah, I thought I mentioned it in the introduction. I went there as part of a study tour, but it was just always a lifelong goal to visit Nubia and visit Kemet, and so I was just fulfilling that lifelong desire. And I too can, like Dr. Salim, I can say it felt like a sacred summoning. It felt like some deep ancestral connection to the area, and it was just a life-changing experience. I just always wanted to go. It's like a longing, something pulling at your heartstrings, and you just have to answer that call. So that was my purpose. Okay. And question: why do you think is so much emphasis put on ancient Egypt and other ancient civilizations, and not enough is being taught about ancient Nubia?
Well, and here's the thing, and it's a travesty, but it's comical to me, in terms of Western ethnography and the study of ancient civilizations, right? There's a hierarchical, manufactured racial rubric, right? And so it goes like this. When you're comparing Egypt with Greece and Rome, Egypt, if you look at the research, especially in the 19th century, Egypt is black, and of course, Greece and Rome is white. If you're comparing Egypt to Nubia, Egypt then becomes white, and then Nubia becomes black. If you're comparing Nubia to the rest of Africa, out of nowhere, Nubia becomes white, and the rest of Africa becomes these sub-Saharan Negroes, right? So this is a ploy and a game that has been played in the scholarship in the research, and so even I'm trying to think of his book because I commented on in my book, right? It'll come to me. The book on black pharaohs, Nubian pharaohs as slaves to Egypt, as inferior to Egypt, as impersonators, as a failed replica of Egypt, right? So Nubia is minimized relative to ancient Egypt, right? Because of the racism and white supremacy that has persisted in Egyptology and even in Nubiology, right? Even someone like George Andrew Reisner, when he's excavating in 100 years ago or more, right, with Harvard, I mean, he said there's no way in the world that these were African people, that these were Black people, these were white people. If they did have color, they were brown Caucasians, right? These are the type of rhetorical constructions and gymnastics that they were going through to explain away that the Nile Valley, both Kemet and Kush, or Egypt and Nubia, were African civilizations. And so, I mean, it has somewhat changed, but you still hear the narrative that somehow Nubia is the subservient impersonator, and that Egypt gave all its culture to Nubia, and Nubia did a good job at regurgitating Egyptian culture. And of course, that's false. These two civilizations emerged out of the same cultural matrix, if you will. And so there's two poles. There's the southern pole of the Nile Valley, which is Kush, and that it can extend as far south as Uganda and the Horn of Africa, which is what Brother Manu Apem likes to remind us, right? And then the northern pole of the Nile Valley certainly is Egypt proper, and so forth. And so we have these two superpowers, and then they weren't the only ones either, because they became states, and we know within states there are other ethnic polities. Even today throughout Africa, all states, most states on the African continent are made up of several ethnic polities, right? I mean, that's from the Sudan to Egypt to Nigeria to South Africa to Ghana, all throughout the continent, right? And so the state is really a supra, if you will, supra-national identity, right? It's the same thing in Kemet and Kush. So there's other ethnic groups within each state, who then become a part of these broader super states that we now call Kush, or Kemet, and so forth. But in Western scholarship, the idea is that Kush was inferior. Wretched Kush, right? Wretched Kush. And we forget that the Egyptians also called the Syrians wretched. But, the scholarship wanted to focus on wretched Kush, and not focus on the wretched Syrians, right? They call political enemies and economic enemies. And at times, Kush and Kemet were political and economic rivals, but they were not distinct, quote unquote, racially, if you will, right? In terms of being both an African people, right? No one today is going to say that the San or the Tamara in Southern Africa or the Zulu and Xhosa are somehow different races. No, they're different African ethnic groups. And we can say the same thing in the Sudan, we can say the same thing in Egypt, and certainly in West Africa as well. So, but the scholarship has ignored that. And because they're interested in this black-white dynamic, right? And when you try to impose this black-white binary, if you will, on the study of Nile Valley civilizations and any African civilizations for that matter, it falls apart. It does not work at all, right? And so it's improving. It's improving, which is why Nubian studies, is a discipline in its own right now. And we have scholars that are uncovering and revealing the authentic history of Kushite Nubian civilization.
But that was a thorough, enlightening answer. I appreciate the brother for dropping knowledge. I feel like I'm in one of your classes. Yeah, so that's great. I think, to add something to what you were saying, as one reason also is that we have to remember that it was only in 1799 when they found the Rosetta Stone. Napoleon's army was in Egypt, and they found the Rosetta Stone, which allowed them to actually decode the hieroglyphs, which had been no one had been able to read for at least, maybe almost 2,000 years, if not more. And so that's how we learned a lot about Egypt, because we were able to actually find out, oh, this is what all of this stuff says on the walls. Mm-hmm. So they haven't found a similar decoding mechanism for the Nubian hieroglyphs or the Kushite texts. So once that happens, I think that we will probably learn a lot more. You'll see a lot more studies on Nubia. So that's one other aspect. And then the other thing I would add is that, um, yeah, exactly. It's a whole racial thing that's going on. And when you look at Egypt, they know that Egypt, the interest of people of European descent in Egypt is that they know Egypt is very pivotal in their foundation, giving them, the fundamentals of civilization, whether it be writing or whether it be religion, spirituality, astronomy, etc., architecture, and things like that. So that connection is a little bit more solid. You have, I mean, when you look at Western civilization, they Greece and Rome are their, beginning point. That's their origin point. A little bit Mesopotamia, you could say Mesopotamia, but really, in terms of full fledged, you're talking about Greece and Rome, and so and even Mesopotamia to this extent, these are civilizations that, well, let me not use that word, but they conquered Egypt, and they basically incorporated in a lot of aspects of Egyptian culture into their society. And so I kind of look at Egypt as like the bridge between the continent and Europe, and one of the bridges between the continent and Asia. I mean, first of all, Europe and Asia they're not continents, so it should be considered Eurasia. So Egypt is essentially that bridge, and so most of the people doing the studies, they're doing it from their bias and their perspective, so they're going to try to connect it to themselves. Also, they conquered Egypt. Greece and Rome conquered Egypt, so their civilizations, they take pride in that because Egypt is one of the greatest ancient civilizations. But one civilization they weren't able to conquer is Nubia or Kush. Greece and Rome never took over Nubia or Kush. And so, they may still, the scholars who, of European ancestry who trace their lineage, their classical lineage to Greece and Rome, perhaps that may have a part to play in why they don't study Nubia as much. I mean, that's just a hypothesis.
That's so true. Thank you. You all touched on it a little bit. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm just making sure you're not going to the next question because I had something to add.
Okay, I was going to the next question, but you can go ahead and add.
You see.
I said, go ahead and add what you wanted to add. You're fine.
Thank you. Thank you. About well, first of all, I want to share my screen just to solidify what Salim was saying. Let me see if I can do that here. And let's see. This is I'm warning. This might be a trigger for some people. I definitely got a nosebleed when I was watching this, so please have some tissues handy because this is just wild.
Who really built the pyramid?
Egypt was an amazing civilization. It was not created by Black Africans. I'm sorry.
It wasn't? Who created it?
People who are white.
You can't even make this stuff up. Like it's there.
Well, yeah. Look, it's that's common opinion that is utterly false and inaccurate. As early as the 19th century, Hegel, and I used to share this quote verbatim in my African Civ classes. Right? He says, "Look, Africa has never contributed anything worthwhile to human history," right? And then he says, "Let this be the last time this topic comes up." Like, I don't even want to talk about this anymore. Africa has never contributed anything to human history. Now, then he goes on to say,
I'm sorry, who said that?
this is Hegel, the German philosopher Hegel.
Hegel, okay.
And then he goes on to say, I know some of you are thinking about North Africa, and I know some of you are thinking about the Nile Valley from Egypt all the way to Ethiopia. Those were not African civilizations and African creations. Those were not. Those were Hamites or whites, right? And so early, in terms of the quote unquote modernity or modern age of European enlightenment and intellectual rise, right? The construct that the Nile Valley in North Africa is not African. It's white, it's European, it's Asian, it's brown Hamites, right? And this would persist in scholarship, right, for a couple centuries or more. And then among popular conceptions, everyday ordinary people, that's what you get, right? These civilizations are not African. So to see, the clip that you just showed of him echoing that, well, of course you would echo that. That's one of millions of truths that come, millions of falsehoods that come out of the European intellectual enlightenment enterprise, right? That are incorrect and certainly misinformation.
Yeah, but today, just like what was saying here, it's not just Europeans anymore, because I grew up in Egypt, as I said, and my first real, genuine interaction with Nubia as an African civilization wasn't until I went to England, to Exeter, where I met Herman Bell, a white man from Virginia, to tell me that this is one of the greatest civilizations, African civilizations of the world, because that's simply not, it's not what's taught in the schools in Egypt. They'll teach you Egyptian history, except there's like a good fragment, a good bracket of that history, of the history of that land, that's pushed away to the side. And I attended an event in Washington, D.C. It was a poetry reading, Busboys and Poets, and I met this sister, and her name was Nubia. And it's like, why? She said, I'll tell you, my parents in their honeymoon went to Egypt. And so they were visiting the Egyptian museum, and their tour guide was showing them around. And then her mother saw little black figurines, and she asked about them. And the tour guide said, oh, they're just Nubians, don't worry. And he kept walking. And so the mother right there decided that she has a daughter, she's going to call her Nubia. And sure enough, she had a daughter, she called her Nubia. But this is something that we deal with right now. And it's not enough that ancient Egypt became this like massive umbrella for which they swept Nubia under from the Egyptian side. We're now seeing the repeat of this from the Sudanese side. Where you have, and Salim, you were there, you were there in Paris, and you were there for the conversations where there was an entire delegation sent by the Sudanese government to say Nubia does not exist, the Nubian civilization does not exist, to say that it's all ancient Sudan. They had presentations saying it's what did they say? They had presentations that called it ancient, dentistry in ancient Sudan. What's ancient Sudan? Like, give me the time frame of which you refer to ancient Sudan. It's something we're dealing with right now. To the point about you saying it is only recently that Nubian studies has become, like, as a department, as an academic department, has become that. As far as I'm concerned, I don't really see a solid enough, how do I put this without offending all the people that are working towards this? There is a handful of scholars who are actively working towards Nubiology as Nubian studies or Nubiology or the study of all that is Nubia, without putting a label on it. But there is a deliberate effort to dwarf that, and even more deliberate effort to discourage people and researchers of African ancestry to pursue that field as a study. You will see that the scholarships that are available for any form of archaeology or cultural heritage are a lot more in non-African, or if we're comparing between Nubiology and Egyptology, you will find that the scholarships are more available in Egyptology than in Nubiology. You have to stop and ask why. Like, for example, and I'm not pointing any fingers here, there was a tweet, I laughed so much. There was a tweet by the American Center for Research on Egyptology that they're having a lightning round for PhD students to speak about their research on Egyptology. So I retweeted that and I tagged Solange, who, if our family tuning in don't know who Solange Ashley is, please go back to that Monday panel and acquaint yourself with each and every, no, the Tuesday panel, and acquaint yourself with each and every one of the scholars on that panel. I tagged Solange and I tagged Kristen and I tagged Black Archaeology, the Society for Black Archaeology, I believe, and I said, bring them out, as in, let's bring more Black scholars in this table. That tweet was deleted. Mysteriously, I don't know where that tweet is. Definitely wasn't me who deleted it. It's just, if we keep waiting for institutions to give us space for us to study what we already know and are trying to connect or bring together with what is yet to be found, then we will forever stay at their mercy. Forever be dependent on their scholarships. We will forever be dependent on their seal of approval. We will forever be told when it is okay and not okay to speak our language, reclaim our heritage, speak our truth, know who we are, and teach our kids who we are. This is why Nubia Initiative is we've been connecting and building this network of scholars, and it's why we actively being that bridge between the Nubian communities in Sudan, in Egypt, and beyond, and in the diaspora, but also between the Nubian communities and academia, and ultimately between the past and the future. This is how we do it. We can't wait for someone to tell us how to do it and it's okay to do it. And this is why I'm so grateful for the work of all you scholars who are on that panel, because you are actively working towards getting more African students or students of African ancestry in this discussion on that platform, getting them to go to the field and connect with the ground. I just think we are at a stage in our life, we're at a crossroads right now, where if we're looking at this, if we're looking at what's happening here, the exchange of knowledge right here, this is a school as far as I'm concerned. Nubia Fest so far has been a school. I'm not saying this because I'm one of the co-creators. I'm saying this because I've learned so much. And if I show you the amount of post-its I have just here from everything I have learned from panels I have sat on, this is a school in its own right. Why do I need a seal of approval and a paper to say, listen, you paid an insane amount of money that was later used to serve other people, not even yourself? Because I'm still bitter about Towson University and the amount of money I paid as an international student to go to Towson University. And until now, Muslim students at Towson University do not have their own designated space to pray. Even though this is something I have campaigned as far back as 2001. So no, we don't give our resources out. We need to find a way where we can create this space for learning, where we are bringing together traditional learning and scientific, quote unquote.
I think, I think it's happening. I think
Yeah.
we are the process that you are describing, right? We are the solution that you are, that you're alluding to. And I mean, again, Shayla, another one of our colleagues who's a Nubian studies scholar, she's an archaeologist, PhD candidate at UC Santa Barbara under Stuart Tyson Smith. When we met on Monday, she said entering into the discipline of Nubian studies is difficult and complicated, right? I don't know if you remember that, right? And that just caught my attention because I had never really thought about it. Never really thought about it like that. And so what we're doing now is trying to create opportunities and pathways, to bring other scholars, other researchers, to focus on this incredibly important part of not only Nile Valley history, but also African history as a whole, and certainly human history.
Absolutely.
Right? And so the facts speak for itself. All we need to do is keep having venues like this, and keep doing the type of work that we're doing, right? To bring people this knowledge and this information, and to make sure they're aware. And then those of us who teach in academia, whatever, teaching 200 and 300 undergrads every semester, right? And so every semester, all my students are exposed to Nubian studies, Nubian history, Nubian archaeology, the latest and current scholarship, and understanding the two civilizations as parallel civilizations in the Nile Valley, and memorizing the chronology of both Kemet and Kush, memorizing the key historical periods. Can you tell me what's going on, what was going on in the Old Kingdom, simultaneously what's going on in the Kingdom of Kerma, right? And having to memorize that. And so this is what, even what I've been doing for 15 years with my students. And I know others are also doing it. And so we just have to keep being persistent, right? Keep moving forward and keep doing what we're doing. I mean, Nubian studies and Nubian history has become, even with all of the difficulties, has become a global conversation, right? That cannot be ignored, which is one of the reasons why I posted the other day, I posted Dietrich Wildung's video with him saying that ancient Kush, the Sudan, was the birthplace of Egypt, Greece, and Rome, and European civilization. And other scholars know that as well, right? And so one of the things that I think can be frustrating, and I hear this from my students all the time, is why weren't we taught this in K through 12? Why did I have to wait until I'm 18, 19, 20 in a college classroom? And so, because, the conversation, we had a conference last year at UC Santa Barbara, Stuart Tyson Smith, the Origins and Afterlives of Kush Conference. The type of information and ideas that came out of that conference, especially with regard to understanding that Kush and Kemet are African civilizations, I was sitting there and I was blown away. I was like, wow. So if we're all on the same page with this, why isn't this common sense and common opinion to the mass population? So that's key, right? For us to talk about this at our elite conferences in Santa Barbara or Rome or Paris or London, and then not get to the masses of people or through youth and children K through 12, that's a major gap.
And if I can interject here, and I think this is what I mean, is that yes, we are speaking about it. Yes, we're talking about what to do and how to do it. But I still say it's not enough. Yes, it's a start, but there's more that we can do, and that is calling out. What do you call it? The elephant in the room. acknowledging that we have in our midst people who could 1000% entirely put a program like this, financially funded, 1000%. We're not calling them out. They will put the money at Harvard. They will put the money in Yale. They will put the money at anywhere else. I'm not even saying put it at HBCU campuses, because my experience with HBCU campus has been absolutely harsh. But if you have some fantastic scholars, some scholars who have done the work that that Tony is doing right now, even actively excavating on the ground, and is able to get funds for that, why aren't we able to get funds for an academic exchange program? Why aren't we going to them and saying, invest here, put some money so we can send scholars out, put some money so we can have a virtual, a communiversity like Kamal is working on? Why must we wait? And to that point, I really want to take it back here. One of the comments said from Selma, and it's very true. She says, there is definitely a real issue with how Sudanese people identify as Africans, and there is a tendency to identify as Arab rather than African. And I think the Arabization of Sudan might have contributed to the marginalization of Nubian history and civilization. That, Selma, is what I was talking about earlier when I said there is an active, currently, there is an active effort to erase Nubian heritage. So when we say endangered Nubian culture heritage, this is exactly what we mean. We mean people who have the backing of government, of institutions, of which is why I say, whatever this department that's being built, whatever this entity that's going to educate our next generations, cannot be institutionalized. We must outmaneuver institutions, but it's just that. It is the effort to uproot and disassociate Sudan from Africa, which is ludicrous because the word Sudan, the full name of the country is Bilad as-Sudan, the land of
the blacks. Well, let me say this. It's not new.
Yes, but it needs to
it's an ongoing enterprise to Africanize and to repress the voice of African culture and African history, right? And it's in the Sudan, it's in Egypt certainly, and it's also in other places on the continent as well, right? It's a rampant issue, right? And it is from the legacy of colonialism and the legacy of Arabization, right? It's also a challenge in the diaspora. It's a challenge in the diaspora, right? This is why you have, even here in the US, many of us, not all of us, who are obviously of African ancestry, but we don't identify with that.
Yeah.
Or if I'm in the DR, I'm clearly an African in the Dominican Republic, but I'm walking around saying I'm Spanish, and I identify more with Spain than I do with Benin, Togo, Nigeria, and Cameroon, right? Where my culture and ancestry come from. And so we've had governmental forces, in fact, let me just mention, from the DR, from the Dominican Republic, President, what is his name? Trujillo, I think.
Trujillo, yes.
Right, in the 50s, de-Africanizing the country, an intentional process. And so we see it in the Sudan, right? Other places in Africa, in the African diaspora, right? And so, and I'm not saying this to negate what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, we know that this is it's an ongoing struggle,
Yeah.
ongoing, right? But yet we're here. Yet we find ourselves here. And yet we find ourselves researching, debating, dialoguing on this ancient African civilization. You know, and for me, out of nowhere, a little kid from West Philadelphia, right, who socialized as a Black American, an American who ain't got nothing to do with Africa. That's how I'm socialized. Yet I'm talking about Nubia. I'm talking about Kush. I'm talking about Taharka, Amani Shiketa, Amani Ra. I'm talking about the other great Shabaka and Tawat Amani, Anla Amani, Nastasin, right? All the Nubian and so forth. And that, you know, that wasn't the design. I wasn't supposed to be talking about this. I wasn't supposed to be writing on it. I wasn't supposed to be researching it, right? Yet we find ourselves here, right? That's why I said for me, and mind you, you know, I like to stay on the ground. I like to be pragmatic, practical, right? Yet for me, it's the ancestors. It's the only way I can explain it, right? And I say that because I was telling Tamara, I spent a year in DC, at Howard Divinity School, 94, 95, before I transferred to Southern California. And while I was there, listen to this. While I was there, I was working for a drug and alcohol rehab program called RAP Incorporated in the Washington, D.C. area. I was a drug and alcohol counselor, right? 75-bed inpatient facility. The dietitian for this drug rehab facility, right, was a brother named Roz. He sat me down one afternoon. This is in the cafeteria of a drug program. And he said, Salim, we talk too much about Kemet. We talk too much about Egypt. Let me tell you, young brother, because he was my elder at that time, right? It's not Kemet. It's not Egypt. It's Kush.
Mm-hmm.
It's Kush. It's what is now the modern Sudan. And then I got defensive. Yeah, I know that already. I know it's Kush. You're not saying nothing to me, right? I got defensive. He said, no. You know nominally, yeah, you know. Okay, this is the origin of yeah. But what I'm telling you this afternoon, young brother, is you have to pursue that with diligence and with a single-minded focus. And you're going to see what that means beyond just rhetoric. You're going to see what it means in terms of how we understand the Nile Valley and all of African history and human history. Right? He's sitting, look, he has no PhD, no. He's a dietitian, drug rehab. Says, follow the evidence to Kush. Then he says this. He says, look, I'm going to give you a clue, right? Follow the mound building cultures. Follow the mound, you know, the tumuli, the tumulus that we know that were at Balana, Kustul, and Tankasi, and Kerma, and so forth, right? Now, I don't know how this brother knew this, but I'm not surprised because there's many of us in our community. We don't have formal degrees from these mainstream institutions, right? But we're well studied and deep in because of what Brother Kamal was doing, because of Black bookstores in particular, serving as universities to the community. So he's telling me, follow the mounds, follow the tumuli. Let me say it again. In a cafeteria at a drug rehab, not in a university setting, he's having this conversation with me.
Yes.
Then I get to Howard and my professor, the late Elias Farajaj. He says, Salim, you should focus on Nubia. I'm like what why is everybody telling me this? Right? Then I move, this is right in DC. Then I moved to Southern California, and I meet a white scholar, Ernest Toon, right? And he had donated a collection to my university called the Ernest Toon Meroitic Nubian and Coptic Collection. He runs up on me one afternoon. I don't know him. He doesn't know me. He sees me reading in the library. Oh, hi, man. You know, you should focus on Nubia. Like, why is this Nubian thing following me? From Philly to DC to LA. People just rolled up on me. You should focus on ancient Nubia Kush. Right? With me. Then I have another scholar give me Stanley Burstein's book, right? I think you may have met Stanley Burstein. I don't know. He focuses on late antiquity stuff, right? He's written books on ancient African civilizations and so forth, and ancient Nubia and so forth, Nubia, Axum and so forth, right? Yes. Then someone comes to me, hands me his book. Look, Celine, you need to see this. You should focus on Nubia. Go look this guy up. You should focus on Nubia. It's like wherever I go, you know, I run up on somebody in the supermarket. You should focus on Nubia.
Yeah.
Right? This is why I was like, wow, this Nubian studies came and got me. It came and got me.
Yeah.
Because of these experiences I had meeting these people, telling me, do this, do this, do this. 3 different cities. Some European ancestry, quote unquote, white, some black, all saying the same thing. And so I have responded and I followed this call. Right? And so for me, the challenges that we're faced with, what you're talking about, all of that stuff is real. I'll be the first to, right? But I'm like, look, it's not insurmountable. Yeah, it's not.
No.
Right.
Wow.
I think that at this time, we're supposed to be having these conversations, these dialogues, and revealing this. Right.
Yeah.
We're a part of a lineage that that needs to have the truth, if you will, out.
Yeah.
No, it's coming.
Yeah. Thank you. The time is.
This is why. This is why you can't shut it off. You can't block the sun. You can't block the sun. When we say we are Africa rising, we mean we are Africa rising. We, every single person of African ancestry that has Africa inside their hearts from within, we are all collectively rising. We may not all realize it, we may not all recognize it just yet, but it's coming. And when you say now Nubian studies, Nubia, Nubiology, all of that is becoming a global discussion. Yes, it's becoming a global discussion, and it was sparked. And some people will argue this with me, but the real spark, and this is why I personally sat outside the embassy of Sudan in Washington, D.C. from April till August, till they signed whatever facade of an agreement they have, because it was never just about Sudan. That revolution was a revolution of consciousness that was sparked on the lands of the Black, throughout the streets of the lands of the Black. And it was never just about Sudan or Sudanese. And for them to now come and say, there is no Nubia, or to disassociate Sudan and all that is Sudan from Africa, from the global Black Lives Movement, is not just ridiculous, it's flat out unacceptable. So yes, these conversations must continue, but as Tamara says, it's a step further than having these conversations. There's not one time that I had a conversation with Tamara about this that she didn't pull out her notebook and say, what are we going to do about it? Like, let's have action plans here. Like, because I'm trying to stay here, I'm trying to go. In fact, she has a panel about that next week.
Yes, in Africa, we're going to be speaking about diasporans and our repatriation back to Africa. And so, different perspectives on it. We're going to be talking to people who are desiring to make the repatriation and those who have already done it. Yeah. So you all really, this was such a good discussion, and you answered a lot of the other questions that I had. But one more, if time permits, how can that? Oh, great! How can diasporans get more involved in Nubia? I have some suggestions, but I want to hear from all of us. Like, how can we get more involved? I say we need to get more involved with some projects like the ASA Restoration Project, maybe start some other projects, get involved with visiting some of the major cities on the Egyptian side as well as the Sudanese side of Nubia, working in some of the villages there and the schools, and just maybe having like an adoptive community or adoptive village project where we get to know our Nubian family and they get to know us, and we can come together and dialogue and come up with some ways to help work together.
Well, I know I've yet to make a trip or journey to Sudan. I was supposed to in 2016. I had tickets, everything ready to go, but my father was ill, and so I had to attend to my father. And since that time, he passed. In fact, he passed a few weeks before I went to the Paris conference, right, in December 2018. So I was dealing with my father's sickness and illness. So I haven't been able to make it yet. So, but I've been in conversation with with Dima and Dr. Mohammed Farouk as well, who did his PhD at UC Santa Barbara. And so that's something that I want to do as soon as I'm able and as soon as it's possible to do so. And I'm bringing it up because some of the conversations I've had is, I want to take students from my university to the Sudan. It's as plain as simple as that. I want to take students to the Sudan. I want to immerse them in the history, the culture, the archaeology, maybe have them experience an active archaeological excavation and so forth. And that's been in my heart for a while to do, right? To expose students to that. And I've been playing with something again. This is just brainstorming and so forth. But I have ties also to Ghana, West Africa, and so I would want to do a Sudanic tour, right? Kind of a Sudanic Sahelian corridor tour, right? And let it be Ghana and the Sudan, Accra and Khartoum, and have exchange between students in the United States, students in Ghana, and students in the Sudan, right? Just study the history and culture, but also learn from one another, right? Let me also put it in another context, right? We know that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has been ratified, I believe, by almost every nation on the African continent, if I'm not mistaken, except maybe for one or two. And the inaugural announcement for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement was this summer. And so the continent, right, on a macro level, we're looking at levels of economic integration in particular, right? The largest free trade zone in the world now is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And I always say that although this is an economic endeavor, economic initiative that's going to require extreme political planning and will, it will be impossible, I think, if we ignore the cultural, educational, and linguistic, right? So in other words, how do we have a continent that begins to integrate continentally if we don't know one another, We don't talk. So Sudanese should know Ghanaians. Ghanaians should know Sudanese. South Africans should know Malians, and people from Mali should know South Africans. And Zambia to Mauritania and everything else in between, right? And so for me, being studied because ancient Kush was so fundamental to African history as a whole. It's a good conversation to have these educational and cultural exchanges, right? With Sudanese students, Ghanaian students, Senegalese, Nigerian students, right? Students from the US African diaspora, of course, as well, right? So these are some of the things that I've been thinking about how do we take this further? So what that means is that a kid in South Philly or South LA or Southeast DC, as well as someone in Accra, as well as someone in Khartoum, someone in Nairobi, right? As well as someone in Dakar, someone in Abidjan, they're all studying the classical foundations of African history, right? All throughout. This should be basic and common because it's basic and common. You can go anywhere in Canada, from Canada to US and Europe. If you take an ancient civic class, you're beginning with Greece and Rome. Be the same way, right, in the African world. Whether you're in a classroom in Kingston, Jamaica, or whether you're in a classroom in the United States, or a classroom in Khartoum, or a classroom in Togo. Right, we should be studying this. It should be common for the youth and common for the children, right? And so I think a way to begin that is these exchange type programs. And I have experience. I've done one before in Ghana, West Africa, and so I would like to do something similar in the Sudan as well. So,
all right,
you're welcome. As I've mentioned when I met you in Paris, and as I will repeat now, there are no coincidences, and divine timing is absolutely real. And I think Nubia is just waiting to cleanse itself out of the corruption eating at its heart right now, for its genuine liberation, for you to come onto free soil and visit the Sudanese side of Nubia. That said, we have so many comments on the side here. I don't even know where to go with all these comments. There's so much to be uncovered in Sudan. Even locals found so many artifacts by chance. Yes, absolutely. How can we revive and bring Nubia to the world? I'll talk about this. This is Dr. Salma Haj Ahmed, who will have a session on Saturday. Please tune in. It's called Explore Sudan, the Land of Nubian Kingdom. What can we do that is beyond that? So what you're talking about a transboundary, a global pan-African curriculum is exactly what Kamal held his panel on in our Africa Week 2020. In his launch of what is Kushkum University that he put together, and maybe you can have you can take a few minutes to tell us about this, Kamal. But the discussion was fascinating because it was, how do we connect this knowledge so that what a child in Cape Town is learning is the same as a child in Benin, in Nairobi, in Nubia, even. How do we make sure that that happens? I think an integral step to that is first acknowledging that we collectively, as a people of African ancestry, have been traumatized into survival mode. And to do that, we feel we need to protect our own little bubble before someone comes close enough to burst it. And before we heal from that kind of mentality, before we are able to allow ourselves to come together in that space of knowledge exchange, like what we're doing here, we're able to do it because we acknowledge that we have been robbed of certain things. We acknowledge that this is something that continues to happen, and the only way to do it is to keep calling it out. But unfortunately, with departments that we're trying to engage with, again, the problem with institutions, the first question is, what's in it to us? Salim, when I approached you to come and speak on this platform, there was no question about how much am I getting paid, who am I doing this. You have this calling to share this knowledge. And if we have more Black scholars who are willing to, I'm not saying don't get paid for the knowledge you are offering. I'm not saying that. But if you are being told that this is a civilization that is endangered and you have a wealth of knowledge about it, come through and share it with us. We need to start seeing Nubia through Black eyes. We need to start seeing Nubia through a Black lens, through an Afrocentric lens. And your first question is, why is this event free? It's a problem. It's free because our youth cannot afford paying to come here and learn. And if they could, if they had the money, they will most likely prefer to spend it somewhere to get whatever it is, to get something for their job, to get something to, to get food, to travel somewhere, whatever it is, to help a family member. And I'm not saying all, but this is the majority. These are the ones we're trying to reach. So we need to make it accessible to them because institutions have deliberately excluded them. One of the sisters who's working with us for Africa Week 2020 actually championed a campaign against the University of Maryland and called them out for their active exclusion of Black students in their enrollment. Like, they will specifically go and try and recruit students to come to the University of Maryland and actively avoid the areas or the high schools that are known to have predominantly Black students, or will not send Black scholars from that campus so that Black students or aspiring students trying to go into the University of Maryland, all they see is not Black. I'm just going to leave it at that. And so representation matters. And we need to be comfortable in calling our people out on that. We need to be comfortable in saying, nah, you're not doing enough. Nah. Coming out on a book, coming out on a documentary, doing all that stuff, that's all great. But come through, we'll amplify you. But yes, your first question should not, must not, cannot, right now in this global Black Lives Movement that we're having, how much am I getting paid?
Well, Nima, knowledge is free as well. And, like you said, it's platforms like this in Africa Week that provide us with an opportunity to have scholars speak about the contributions that our ancestors made and the
knowledge
things.
Is free, Tamara. Sorry to interrupt you. Knowledge is free. This platform is not. On this platform here, I am personally paying. The co-creators of Nubia Fest have to pay out of pocket. And I'm very grateful to the Union for Nubian Studies. I'm extremely grateful for Cloud 68 for their volunteering of their time and not asking for money to put together the website. But this stuff, it costs. And if it doesn't cost any of that, it costs sleep. I don't remember the last time I slept just because I'm not able to have someone support me in maneuvering these things. This entire fest was put together by 4 people and the tech crew from Cloud 68, but 4 people. Have you seen the calendar? 4 people who have at least 2 other jobs each and at least 5 other volunteer positions each. So we can do a lot more than ask how much we're getting paid if we're trying to save an endangered heritage, if we're trying to say we are Africa Rising, if we're trying to really follow Kush, like Salim is saying, follow the calling.
The individuals who made those requests, this wasn't for them. Those of us who are here,
exactly,
we're the ones that's supposed to be here and delivering, what we're delivering, and your sacrifice and your commitment is beyond commendable. But I know it also comes from a place. It comes from a place of love and sincerity, right? For this work, and so you have to, for me, I always ask myself, um, imagine, imagine the world, or our struggle without the contribution of this person. I try to do that sometime with my friends, my acquaintances, my colleagues, my peers, just to remind me of how valuable each person is and what they do, right? And so imagine, uh, uh, imagine this without Dima and this platform and what you're doing, right? So it's appreciated, and not only is appreciated, but it's needed. you know,
Yeah.
Me, um, the same as you and everyone here is the love, the work, and it's the love for the people, right? To honor is to honor our ancestors,
Yes. Yes.
history, and our struggle, right? Because this entire thing that we call life is a gift, it's an opportunity. And so for those to realize that, that's good. And so while we're here, we have to make the contribution that we're supposed to do, right? In the highest level possible. Right. And so I'm grateful for that. And I'm also grateful for your contribution too.
Thank you. Yes.
I am grateful for all the work that you have done, are doing, and will continue to be doing, each and every one of you, in not just towards protecting, preserving, and promoting our endangered Nubian heritage, but in connecting that heritage to the continent, in connecting that heritage to all that is Africa and African on the continent and in the diaspora. I can't tell you how many Nubians don't know. The Nubians in the villages don't know. And if they do know, they know of the Europeans who make their way to the excavation sites. They know of the people who will come and take pictures of their colorful homes and be welcomed into their, but they don't know of you. They don't know of Shayla. I mean, they know of you, of course, because you, but I mean, those of us who are interested and outside and unable to have access to these things. So I really, okay, so this is my pledge to solution-based. I will be reaching out to you so we can look at how we can co-create this exchange program, because this is something I started speaking to Howard and UDC too, about having an exchange program. When I say Howard and UDC, I mean their graduates, because I stopped dealing with their institutions and their departments. Graduates of Howard, like Kamal, and graduates of UDC who are interested in connecting with the continent. And their only request is just find a roof for us over our heads. We will make our way there. We will eat what you eat, just to have a roof over our heads and whatever is needed to connect. That spirit is there, and it is growing, and it is full of hope. And just to balance out whatever anger I just put out, there is this to look forward to and work towards, and I pledge and vow.
No, it's righteous indignation.
Can I say something about? I know there was a question earlier. I'm sorry because I was talking to one customer into the bookstore, but people were talking earlier about what can we do to bring more scholars of African descent to Nubia and to get us engaged in Nubian studies. And I would say, earlier, Dr. Faraji mentioned that his students always would ask him, why do we have to learn this in college? We didn't learn this in K through 12. So I want to also say, like, in addition to working at the bookstore, I work at a private African-centered school, which is a part of a greater consortium of schools called the Council of Independent Black Institutions. And they've been around since the 70s, but the thing about it is the capacity is small. The work that we do is great. I mean, there's schools in Atlanta and DC, Philly, and New York, other places, and there's been many schools that have come and gone. But like my students, I do social studies, and I'm working with fifth graders and seventh, eighth graders, and I mean they've been learning about Nubia and Kemet, since they were in preschool. Many of them, and you see the difference. You can see that because I work with students in general population, and one of the major differences that you see is a level of confidence in themselves, uh, and just not feeling like you're on the periphery of somebody else's story. Like we have to become. That's really what it means to be African centered or Afrocentric. To centralize your own experience and your views, and not to put it above anyone else, but it's just to understand that your point of view is valid as anybody else's vantage point from where they're looking at. And so we have to stop trying to look at look at our story, and just look at reality from other people's vantage point. I mean, we're only going to understand reality more the more we realize the vantage point where we stand, and then we can understand what we're looking at. Because from my vantage point, I mean, just as an example, I mean, we may be looking something straight ahead, but yet we keep trying to listen to somebody else who's looking at something from the side view, and then where we it just messes things up like on so many different levels. So I think one of the things that we need to do is to support homeschooling. We need to support independent schools like the one I work at and others, and we need to create schools. Like we need to create the things that we don't see. If you look at all the things that you like about school and the students who are asking these questions, they can create a community or create a school, or even just create online website. There's so many different things that we could create, an after school program or whatever, that can provide what we feel as though we were missing. So we should write children's books. We need some children's book authors. I need to try my hand at writing a book. One of the things that impacted me, I didn't say this before, but I should have, was reading Dr. Faraji's book on the roots of Nubian Christianity, which I actually bought from Sankofa Bookstore, which I work in right now. So you can order it on our website too at sankofa.com. We can get that to you, and we ship as well. So, but that book really changed. I was searching for a book like that, like my whole life, I would say. Um, yeah, I really was, because I grew up in a Catholic church, but interesting thing about it is the church that I went to, we had all black images. I guess they went through a awakening, and so we had all black images of biblical figures, and even my priest, my pastor, he was the one that told me a lot about ancient African history and the roots of. I mean, a lot of people don't know it when they mention the rivers of the Garden of Eden, and even in Genesis. I mean, two of those rivers are in Africa, the Gihon and the Pishon River. They're the rivers that go in Africa, but we only talk about the Tigris and the Euphrates. So it's like, why do you block off a whole? I mean, come on. It's literally in the first chapters of the Bible. It mentions Ethiopia. It even says that the rivers are are there. So that Nubia and Ethiopia is a general term, which meant black, the lands of the black. So also it was Kush. They're talking about Kush and Nubia and Kush. There's Kush, Nubia, Axum, Merowe, Napata. These are just different areas. I mean, even Eritrea and Djibouti. I mean, these are just different areas of a greater, black civilization. So I just think that we should start our own schools. We support the ones that exist. Home schools, write children's books, work with the youth. I mean, don't forget the adults, but work with the youth so that by the time they get to 18, 19, it's not the first time they're hearing it. then they can actually they can begin to do something with the information that they've been gaining all of these years, as opposed to when you get to college and then you learn this information, it kind of like jolts you into a stop. You become disoriented. Even though you're getting new information, you have to balance out the information with new information. You it takes a long process for a person to reorient themselves, and they may already be studying medicine. You know what I mean? They may already be on a trajectory where they don't have time to like switch up and learn everything that they didn't learn. So we got to work with the youth.
Real quick, now, give a very brief about Cushcom University and the camp that you started. I'm gonna drop the link about your presentation from Africa Week 2020. But can you give a brief, and maybe that's something that we can later follow up on to grow as something not just here, but.
Well, yeah. So the community university is a venture that I started essentially to be um, a bridge between, like we say, we have all the, like what I learned. One thing I learned about being in the African Studies department at Howard is that there really is no shortage of information about our people and our history. I mean, but the only problem is most of it is it's like after wearing the ivory tower. I mean, you have to read some super boring, long books, you know, using all of this jargon that the average person's not going to really want to access. And so, yeah, listening.
Yeah, I had a question. You said that there's no shortage of information about our people, which is true. But how do we decipher what accurate information versus what is, what we've been taught in the mainstream education? How do we distinguish between?
Well, one of my teachers, this isn't even one of my teachers in school, it's just a brother elder in the community. One thing he showed me is that when you open up a book, really you should read the back of the book first. You should go through that, you should go through all the references. We need to start getting back to references, because the references in the book is the building block that what actually created the book. And so we should study those references, check up on those to see. You can kind of, one thing you begin to see is that a lot of people reference the same people, and so a lot of books are just regurgitating the same old information. So once you can kind of see who these people are who are writing these books and find out about them, like for example, if you can learn about some of the people who wrote these books. I mean, not all of them, but it is good to know a little about. I mean, if you know George Reisner, who is like one of the leading scholars in Nubian studies, I mean, look at his background and you can look at some of the things that he said. One thing about it is you can get a lot of factual information from people that have a bias. So it's good to read all different people, but you may come to a different conclusion. Even you look at information, but you may not actually come to the same conclusion that they came to, because some of these people, like Dr. Faraji said, they were staring at information and they refused to accept because it went against their perceived notions. It's one thing I learned a while ago is that I don't know if it's most people. I say most people, but it may not be most people. We can say many people. Many people already have a conclusion before they get to they already have an answer that they want to believe before they actually do their research and try to find out. So the information that they get, it's interesting how the mind, it categorizes it, or it qualifies it in a way that can make them still believe what they believe. Like the guy on the video who said Egypt is created by white people. I mean, you can literally look at pictures and see. You can literally look at pictures and see that people weren't white. And you can literally study the history and you can chart when so-called white people, because let's be honest, just a different story. The Greeks weren't all white per se. either. Let's just be honest about that. But the first Europeans that came in were the Greeks. That was over 3,000 years after the history had already started. So, I mean, one way is to decipher is to try to figure out who is saying what they're saying and what's their purpose. What is their purpose? Who are they? Where do they come from? I'm not saying you just judge it based on that person, but studying who is saying what, and why did they say it, when did they say it, could also be helpful in deciphering who's valuable. I mean, you can't just trust anything. I would definitely caution against discrediting anything that you see like a scholars of European descent saying and accepting everything that you see coming out of someone of African ancestry, because that's not wise. Like you said, the scholar Herb Boyd, inspired you all to learn more. So you can learn from whoever, but you have you have to study that person's track record, I would say.
Ashe, I'll just correct. It's Herman Bell. And on that note, if Tamara will allow, I know everyone's getting tired, and I do want to share this. Ooh, what happened here? Video of Herman.
Okay, as long as time permits, sure, we can share a video.
We're the last panel, so theoretically,
all right.
We're the last session of the day.
You saved the best for last.
Always, sis, always.
I am going to have to because I have another appointment.
Yes,
I'm going to have to excuse myself. But you're about to another
I'm
video?
about to play a video of Herman his dedication. This was a video he made during the Revolution of Solidarity. It's not a story of his time in Europe.
Okay.
3 minutes.
How long is it? Okay, all right.
I would like to tell you about 1964. My wife and I visited a remote part of Sudan by the River Nile, Southern. And in Southern, I became very ill, so I could be fine. The local inhabitants, people of Saras, opened up a rest house by the River Nile. And as I lay there in the rest house, people from the villages came, men, women, and children. They came by the hundreds, long queues, just to shake my hand and to wish me good health again. This was, I think, the best medicine I had. And I will never forget the kindness, the generosity of the people there. This is the Sudan to which many people long to return. The Sudan of nonviolence. The Sudan you can live a life of hospitality to strangers, take them in, and show the kind of affection and love which we received in those years. And there's nothing that I can say that will add to the glory of the martyrs, the non-violent martyrs, of people who would like to see a return to the old ways of the Sudan. Inshallah.
Thank you, Dr. Faraji and Dima and Kamal. Thank you so much. And thank you for all those comments from our family out there. And now it's kind of beautiful. I call Imagine.
Well, thank you again.
I see him in the backstage. He was saying it was great to put a face to Dr. Faraji. So I'm wondering if he'll join us. Mazen, are you coming through?
Well, let me just say thank you again for the invitation and the opportunity. I appreciate it. And I always look forward to sharing and engaging in dialogue regarding ancient Nubia and Kush, right? We can never talk about it enough as far as.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I just want to take a quick second and I'm sorry. They're having a party outside. If you guys hear the music in the background, I apologize. But I do want to let you guys know I've been following along in this conversation. This is a very important conversation that we definitely need to have, not just here, but collectively across the world and in Nubia as well. And I want to, thank all of you for having this conversation. And thank you, Dr. Faraji, for, explaining how Nubia followed you around. I think that was a very good story, and that's it goes to show that what you're meant to do, you're going to be doing it, and so on behalf of all the Nubians out there, I also want to thank you all for being here and engaging us and giving up some of your time and your effort to have these conversations, and this time that you can be speaking, doing multiple other things, spending time with loved ones and all these other things. So I really appreciate the fact that you all have dedicated this time to us, that you have volunteered to be panelists, that you've given to us, and the love that you've constantly shown Nubia.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mazen.
Thank you, Mazen. I second everything Mazen said. And thank you, Tamara, for taking the initiative to have this panel, to share these journeys and how they all connect us. It's really, really wild how we're literally all connected because of Nubia.
Yes. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Roger. Thank you, Selma.
Thank you, Tamara, for inviting us. Thank you, Dr. Faraji, for being here. Thanks for writing that book.
Thank you. I appreciate you all.
Thank you to everyone in the comment section. Thank you so much.
And then here, just a reminder that Dr. Salma Ahmed has her session on Saturday. And this is, thank you so much for putting this together with Sister Dima. We cannot forget Vincent and Alexandros from the Union of Nubian Studies, and the great people at Cloud 68 as well. Thank you all for tuning in. Tamara, thank you once again.
Thank you.
Kamau, let's keep talking, let's keep building, let's keep scheming, let's create that Pan-African curriculum. And hopefully our very own entity to keep exchanging this knowledge. Thank you all very much. Happy logo to everyone tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.